War Beneath the Roots is a fantasy fiction podcast. While rooted in tabletop storytelling, this is a fully written narrative crafted for audio. Video versions are available to enhance the experience with maps and art, but they're not necessary. This podcast contains violence and themes that may not be suitable for all audiences. She arrived at dusk. Fenverden rose from a fog. Sharp spires, slick streets, white stone. The statues watched. Not moved, not turned, just watched. She passed a knight bowed in prayer. Its lips moved. No sound. A child reaching skyward. Its marble fingers twitched. Twilight came. The wind changed, and they whispered. Not all at once, not loud, like secrets shared between teeth. She leaned close to listen. She heard her name, not the one she was given at birth, the one only her sister knew, only her sister. Wait, she didn't have a sister. She stumbled back. The statue stared. Its eyes had not been carved like that before. A man offered her shelter, a sculptor, hands like cracked clay. He gave her tea, a cot, a room with no corners. From the room that night, she heard the statue whisper again. A memory of a childhood she never lived, a fire she never fled, a hand she never held. In the morning, she awoke, coughing marble dust. The man was gone. The statue was gone. Not ready for home, she turned back west, to Bastau, the trade city. She could find something there. Something. Chapter 5. The tent city sprawled beyond Kita's western gate, like a ragged wound on the earth. Canvas and tattered blankets formed a patchwork of hope and desperation. Families huddled around flickering fires, merchants hawked meager wares from ramshackle stalls. Children chased stray dogs through muddy lanes. Markin skirted the main thoroughfare, each step heavy in the chill night air. He came to the small cluster of 3 tents where his family had lived these past weeks. His mother, his sister, and himself, hoping citizenship would buy them safety. It was later than he'd meant to be by the time he crept back to the tents. To avoid waking his family, he slipped into the usually vacant canvas shelter, and with the world muffled around him, collapsed onto his bedroll, sleep claiming him almost before his head hit the fabric. When the morning light filtered through the canvas, he awoke, eager. He paused at the yawning flap of the first tent. Inside, the cot was stripped bare. Their few pots and pans lay stacked neatly by the fire pit, no sign of breakfast left unwashed. His mother's sewing bay lay closed on a makeshift table, his sister's spare cloak always folded on a crate, missing. No final notes, no recent footprints leading away, just the distant clatter of the tent city waking. "Mother?" he whispered, voice brittle. He slipped inside the next tent, same emptiness, save for a note placed on a wooden crate. "Markin, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. Don't worry, I'm not lost. Just following the work that found me. There's a miller's farm north of here, past the wood line, that needs help tending fields. I promised them a month's service in exchange for coin, food, and a place to sleep. Cassandra left at first light to join the Guardians. She's safe among the Druids. Trust her as I do. She believes it is her path. Your sister reminds me each day how brave she is. I know this is sudden and hard. You carry our hopes in your bow and in your heart. Keep going, my son. Do what you must for Kita, for us. I shall do the same and return as soon as I can. All my love, Mother." The wind tugged at loose cords overhead, hollow and accusing. He clenched his jaw and stepped back into the gray morning. An hour later, Markin slipped through the Adventurers Guild's heavy, iron-bound doors as the morning light draped the front room. Blue stood by the weapons rack, cleaning his axe with methodical precision. Beam stood as still as the wooden column he leaned against, spores settling at his feet like drowsy motes. Mr. E hovered near the bulletin board, absently tapping his pocket watch in an apparent rush to do something else. "All right," Markin said, voice low but steady. He drew a deep breath. "We aren't heading to the shrine after all. At least not yet. It's in the same general direction, but I spoke with Aylin Redding last night. She needs us in Ironhold. Apparently Captain Varen has gone off the rails, and House Redding wants it sorted." Blue finished cleaning his axe and eased it up onto his shoulder. "Why? Who is Redding?" "A major noble family. They oversee the town guard and militia across Lord Cedric's territories. Aylin offered to sponsor our temporary citizenship in Kita, paid in coin if you'd rather, and she's authorized the mission. I asked her for information about..." Markin paused and lowered his voice. "About Olathontor." Blue stood up tall, dropped the cloth he'd been using to clean his blade. "She knows of him?" Markin nodded. "She hinted at allies of his in the city. Said it's dangerous to pry. Figured you'd disregard the warning. Maybe she can tell us more." Beam's spores flared bright as he faced Blue. Resolve. Mr. E tucked his watch away and grinned. "A rogue captain in a hill town? Sounds like Tuesday. Oh, we're right on schedule. Probably enough time for that druid detour." Markin met each of their eyes in turn. "We leave now. Our packs are already stocked. Does anyone need anything else?" Blue sheathed his axe with a single definitive clank. "Let's not keep this Redding waiting." Beam began to move toward the heavy door. Mr. E gave a theatrical bow in the direction of no one. They emerged into Kita's dawning streets and collected the mounts the guild had readied. The horse shied at Blue's bulk, not bred for the burden of a minotaur. Beam faced his horse, his spores releasing a simple no. With a grunt, Markin traded saddles for shafts, and the stablemaster hitched the beast to a battered cart instead. Markin noticed Mr. E settle into the saddle with effortless grace, rein slack in his fingers, horse obeying a silent command. Behind them, the battered cart creaked under Blue's weight and protested Beam's with a hefty groan. Markin couldn't help but wonder if it would survive the journey as they rolled beyond the city gates. Quite a few miles down the main road, the first fierce heat of spring had settled over the land, the sun blazing like a newly kindled hearth. They slipped off the road and down a narrow trail into the cool shadow of the pines, grateful for the respite beneath the whispering, leafy canopy. A few paces in, they saw a small opening surrounded by toppled standing stones, half buried in undergrowth. In the center, a blue wisp hovered above a moss-clad altar, pulsing like a wounded heartbeat. The air smelled of damp leaves. Beam stepped forward, studying the area with spores extended. After a few minutes, he raised both arms, fingers woven like living root. A faint wind whispered through his branches, stirring leaves overhead in a low rustling that sounded like a chant. The wisp drifted closer, flickering light reflecting off the standing stones. Markin began a caution, but with a sudden bright flicker, it revealed a vision. A beautiful druid, long dead, her robes singed and skin pale as birch bark, collapsing mid-spell beneath a misplaced word. Her spirit lay bound to the altar, her final breath trapped in the stone basin's hollow. Beam knelt and closed his wooden eyes, spores drifting in tight rings. Compassion. Release. He began a silent meditation, and from the surrounding forest came a slow bloom of flowers, nightshade violets, moon lilies, and small ferns unfurling throughout and beyond the circle. The brush ahead trembled, and one by one small creatures, mice, frogs, a scuttling badger, slipped into the clearing, drawn by something older than hunger. Their eyes dark and unblinking, settled on the cracked stone altar. Then, with a thunder of hooves that shook the fallen leaves, a great stag stepped into the circle. Its coat was matted with mud, antlers wearing lichened wreaths. Beam's branches creaked as he knelt, spores drifting in the heavy air, an unspoken invocation. With a silent gesture of warning through his shifting spores, Blue, Markin, and Mr. E all stepped backward outside the circle, hearts racing. The stag lifted its mighty head, exposing the slender curve of its throat. In a single brutal motion, Beam plunged a root-forged blade deep between those living ribs. The creature's roar was a raw, tearing sound that echoed off the large toppled stones. Blood gushed in hot rivulets, flooding the altar's curved runes and quenching the cursed moss with a steaming flood. As the life drained from the stag, the scattered wildflowers at the altar's base blackened and curled, petals shriveling to powder beneath the crimson tide. Fern fronds turned brittle. When the stag's legs gave way, it slumped across the stone, its final breath misting in the chill air. Beam's spores pulsed once. Release. And the sacred wind stilled. All that remained was the stag's hollow eyes and the altar's blood-slick surface, where life had paid the price. Then, carried on a gentle breeze, came a soft, grateful voice. Life for life, bond at last undone. Thank you, child of wood and bone. The wisp flickered once more, then dissolved into motes of light that drifted into the broken pillars and vanished upward through the canopy. They retraced their steps down the narrow forest trail in heavy silence. The broken pillars and shattered totems fell behind them, replaced by the hush of brambles and the slow drip of melting sap. Beam's shoulders sagged beneath his mossy cloak. Each step seemed to cost him. His spores drifted slowly in ragged clusters. Grief. Regret. Each exhalation a fungal mist, a quiet apology to the stag he had felled. Markin fell into step beside him. It was necessary, he offered, voice rough. You freed her. That's good, he said, clearing his throat. Beam said nothing, but his spores pulsed once. Gratitude. Though the tremor in that glow spoke louder than words. Blue brought up the rear, horn veins dim. He said nothing, his silence a shield against the forest sorrow. Mr. E strolled between them, tapping his watch and humming to himself. They emerged onto the rutted main road under a sky bruised with impending dusk. Ironhold lay a day's ride southwest. They pressed on until a fallen oak offered shelter from the dust of the road and the weight of exhaustion. They made a camp in a hollow off the road, one small fire, 4 weary shadows. Beam sank beside the embers, spores coalescing at his feet, tired. Markin unpacked their meager rations, offering a thin smile. Tomorrow, Ironhold, he said. We'll set things right. Blue sat watch on a fallen log, axe across his lap, eyes fixed forward. The crackle of the fire was the only sound. Markin broke the silence. Mr. E, back at the guild you mentioned a druid. A detour or something? Did you know that was coming? Mr. E perused the darkness with a tilted head. Do you ever feel, he said softly, like you're living yesterday's tomorrow? He tapped his watch quizzically. I passed through that circle before, or after. I can't recall which. Markin frowned. What do you mean? Mr. E shrugged, pocket watch dangling at odd angles. Dreams and memories, they bleed together. I see rain on stones that haven't been laid yet. I can taste conversations we haven't had. But ask me who I am or why I came, and the answers just slip away like smoke. He blinked twice, as if surprised by the weight of his words. Beam's spores drifted closer, pulsing. Comfort. Blue's head dipped in acknowledgement. Markin laid a hand on the old man's shoulder. We'll figure it out, he said. Together. Mr. E flashed them a crooked grin. Splendid. I've always been fond of riddles, he exhaled, though I'm less sure about being the riddle. His watch clicked twice, once backward, once forward, before settling into silence. Markin shifted on the ground, tugging at the hem of his mud-caked tunic. "Think you could work that, cleaning trick of yours?" he asked quietly. Mr. E's lips curved into a mischievous smile. "Perhaps. But first, let's see if you've any spark of talent." For the next hour, Mr. E paced around the fire, chanting odd rhythms and teaching Markin the words needed for the spell. Markin seemed undisturbed with failure, willing to try again. "Focus," Mr. E said, brow creasing. "Imagine the dirt dissolving, the fabric fresh as spring rain." Markin closed his eyes and tried again. There was a faint pop, a crackle, and a swirl of dust. Markin's eyes shot open. "Did you see that?" He looked over at Blue. "Did you see it?" Looking back to Mr. E. I did something." His grin split his face. Mr. E laughed. Buoyed by that success, Markin tried and tried again. The movement faltered, the focus relaxed, or the words weren't quite right. The memory of that pop kept his spirits high, but exhaustion was taking him. Finally, Mr. E stepped forward. With a practiced flick of his wrist and soft words, Markin's tunic shimmered. The mud vanished in a rush, the cloth clean and crisp. Markin ran his hand over the sleeve. Mr. E tucked his watch away. "May that, something be the first of many." They sat beneath the drifting spores and low firelight, each lost in their own thoughts, bound by the road ahead and the secrets trailing behind. When the first pale stars crowned the sky, they took watches in turn. At dawn, they'd ride for Ironhold, and whatever fates awaited there. Chapter 6. The early mist clung to Ironhold's broken palisade like a shroud. Markin led them through the yawning gate, the leather scroll from House Redding heavy in his pocket. Beam's moss cloak brushed the scarred wood. Mr. E's pocket watch clicked with restless urgency, and Blue's horn veins crackled intermittently in the half-light as he strode beside him. They slipped through silent streets where shuttered stalls rattled in the wind. Only the distant clang of a hammer and the low murmur of prayer told them of life within the old stone keep at the town's heart. The city square had been remade into a temple. Candlelight bled from the shrine, an inner sanctum ringed by hooded figures chanting in low, spiraling tones. Their voices coiled around fused stone obelisks, which pulsed with an eldritch glow and bore fresh drag marks at their base. Markin held up a hand, and the party crouched behind a fallen cart, watching. A man knelt among the hooded figures, eyes hollow, clothed in the tatters of his captain's militia uniform. "Captain Varen," Markin whispered. A pale-faced acolyte stood behind Varen, carving runes into his back with a slow, deliberate blade. "They've turned him into part of the rite," Markin said, breath tight. Mr. E leaned forward, watching the knife work its way across Varen's skin with a kind of horrified clarity. "That glow," he murmured. "Old power. Waking power." "Is he alive?" Blue asked. His hands clenched the haft of his axe. Varen twitched, just once. Not pain, a response. "He's still in there," Markin said, unsure. Beam's spores pulsed urgency. Interrupt. He stepped forward, spores moving into the square from his bark like embers on the wind. He raised one gnarled hand, and a single pulse trembled through the air. The acolyte carving into Varen jerked, hands raised, began shrieking, stumbling in blindness into an obelisk. Green motes flickered in his sightless eyes. Blue tore through the outer circle like a siege engine let loose. His axe sang once, low and wet, cleaving through bone and spine. 3 zealots dropped in pieces, their blood painting the obelisk in steaming streaks of red. One crawled back toward Blue, trailing entrails, plunging a knife into Blue's foot. He stepped on his skull and crushed it with a sickening crunch, limping forward, eyes blazing blue. Mr. E snapped his watch shut. Time nodded. Torches shuddered. flames dancing backward. Time snarled like a caught gear, stalled, then screaming forward. 2 acolytes ignited mid-chant, shrieking as fire bloomed from nearby torches, turning their prayers to ash and stench. From the shadows, Markin loosed arrow and arrow, one clean through a zealot's jaw and out through the back of his neck, another buried through the chest, dropping its target twitching. He advanced with a cold precision, with a starking contrast to the hobgoblin fight at the watchtower. 3 acolytes hurled themselves at Blue from the smoke, knives flashing in both hands. He swung wide, caught one across the chest, but the other 2 crashed into him, blades puncturing his ribs, stomach, thigh. Blue staggered under the weight, his gray skin slick with blood. With a dagger drove into his back with both hands, twisting, Blue dropped to a knee, gasping, blood pouring in rivulets. Beam reached down, fingers digging into the ground, snaking beneath the floor like veins under pale skin. The stones trembled, and from the breaking obelisk's shattered stones rose spectral beasts, stag and wolf, raven and lynx, each outlined in a faint green fire. The fey spirits fell upon the cultists like famine, tearing cloth and flesh surgically removing them from Blue. Limbs fell, screams rose before the spirits vanished in a whisper of leaves. Mr. E gathered himself from the fiery spell he'd unleashed, too late. The surviving acolyte lunged at him, stabbing a dagger deep into Mr. E's shoulder, barely missing his heart. The cultist pulled the blade back for another attack, but Markin's arrow buried in the cultist's throat mid-thrust. The cultist toppled at Mr. E's feet, blade clattering across the stones as they both collapsed in a pile. Blue watched helpless as Varen rose from behind the altar like a corpse pulled by strings. His body shuddered with unnatural stiffness, eyes flat as river stones. Black veins threaded across his skin like ink. He gripped a sword in both hands, too tightly, knuckles white, and staggered forward with slow, twitching steps. Markin barely saw him coming in time to drop his bow. He raised his blade quickly, but awkwardly. He was no duelist, no knight, but instinct and desperation carried him. Steel clanged against steel, and the fight was ugly. Varen's strength was wrong, jerky, erratic, but overwhelming. Markin parried barely in time, teeth clenched, every blow jarring down to his bones. Varen didn't speak, just growled, a low, mindless sound. Beam's roots covered the ground, curling up the altar's sides, pressing into the stone. His spores pulsed, the obelisk trembled. Sickly light cracked through it, and it burst. Green fire flared. A great howl rose, not from a throat, but from the stone itself, like the temple was screaming. Varen faltered mid-swing, sword drifting in his hands. The black in his veins recoiled, fading into pale skin. His eyes blinked once, twice, then widened in horror as if waking from a nightmare. But Markin didn't notice any of that. He saw the opportunity, the gap in Varen's deadly attack. Markin's blade punched through Varen's gut. The man gasped, a sound of pure human pain, and dropped his sword. His hands went to the wound, blood pouring between his fingers. He looked up at Markin, eyes wide. "Where?" he whispered. "I don't understand. What is this place?" Markin didn't answer. He just lowered him gently as Varen sagged, twitching once. Then he went still, blood seeping out in a wide, silent pool. Markin stood among the bodies, sword still in hand, breathing hard. Blood dripped from the blade, bright red. Human blood. His stomach turned. He looked down at Varen's corpse, slumped in the mud where he'd fallen, eyes open. No rage, no madness. Just the glassy emptiness of someone who'd come back to himself, too late. Markin's sword clattered to the ground as he took a step back. He looked around. The acolytes he'd shot. A boy, maybe 15, maybe younger. The arrow still jutted from his ribs, snapped where he'd landed. Markin's throat tightened. He didn't know the boy, didn't know if he'd ever had a choice in any of this. Was he really an acolyte? Was he swept up in this mess or possessed himself? It didn't matter now. He was dead. Another body in the cold mud. Another ghost in Markin's mind. He squeezed his eyes shut, but the memories pushed through anyway. Eliza, Aldrich, their deaths had changed him. But this? Blue dragged himself to Markin's side, face clenched in pain. Markin continued to stare down at the corpses. A moment later, townsfolk emerged from the smoke and ruin, guards, peasants, old priests, all drawn by the noise. One saw Varen's body and dropped to their knees. "That was Captain Varen," they said. "He used to be one of the good ones. Led the defense during the Knoll raids. He was a hero. Until he started going out to the old shrine. Ever since it started glowing, he'd go alone. Came back quieter. Stranger." Markin said nothing. He stared at the blood on his hands, struggling to make sense of it. No justice here. No villain was punished. Just a man, corrupted, broken. Beam knelt beside Blue, fingers brushing the blood around the knife wounds. From his palms a faint glow pulsed, greenish and warm like sunlight. Tiny threads of fungal filaments unspooled from his bark, thin as hair and alive with subtle motion. They sank into the torn flesh, stitching it together from beneath the skin. Beam turned next to Mr. E. The old man lay slumped against the dead acolyte that had struck him. Mr. E.'s breath was shallow, face pale as wax. Beam laid one hand on his chest and the other on the stone beneath them. A pulse passed through both. From the cracks in the shrine's floor, motes of glowing dust rose in slow spirals. They gathered around Mr. E like fireflies caught in a breeze, spiraling faster than sinking into his skin. A long breath rattled in his lungs. His shoulder began stitching together with the familiar green glow of Beam's spores at work. Mr. E.'s fingers twitched. His eyelids fluttered open. Beam sat back, eyes dimly glowing, breath shallow from the effort. Behind him, soft moss grew in a halo where he'd knelt, vibrant and alive in the corpse-strewn ruin. The last echoes of violence had faded. The floor of the desecrated shrine was a tapestry of blood, shattered obsidian and torn robes. The air was still thick with smoke and the smell of burnt flesh. Markin knelt beside the lead acolyte's body, the one whose blade carved Varen and whose commands, even through blinded eyes, had stirred the others like a nest. He rifled through the blood-soaked robes and pulled free a small glass jar, green and bulbous, stoppered with black wax. Inside floated something that should not have been preserved. Markin guessed it to be the inside of a throat and a severed tongue, the flesh shriveled and dark, suspended in thick, oily fluid. As Markin held it up, the jar whispered, "We bleed the stone so it may bloom. The roots will feast, then we shall die. Broken flesh makes way for new order." Markin grimaced and nearly dropped it. Blue, feeling recovered, moved to Markin. "What is that?" Mr. E spoke from the ground. "Something, a voice jar. A ritual object, channeling, communication, very dangerous." Markin stuffed it into a cloth and tied it shut. As the party sifted through the dead acolytes' tunics, they found strange pendants on the bodies. A triangle of blackened iron, with one point missing. In faint script barely etched into the back, read, "Only the broken can see." They exchanged looks. "We need someone who knows what this means," Markin said. Townspeople had begun moving out into the city square. "I'm Father Kalen," a voice from the shadow spoke up. "May I take a look?" Father Kalen was a wiry, haggard man, with ink-stained fingers and a blunt manner, the kind who looked more at home in archives than in prayer. The shrine's quiet walls echoed as he examined their findings by torchlight. He held the pendant between thumb and finger. The fractured vow. I thought they'd been wiped out in the old coast purges 20 years ago. Heretics, fanatics. They believe suffering is sacred, that breaking the world is how you remake it. He turned to the jar, face pale. This is worse. They were used to imitate divine speech, not just worship. They channel something, and if this thing was speaking of roots and blooming, you think they're communicating with the bloom? Markin nearly spat out. Well, it's hard to say, really. Possibly. Or maybe just allowing the bloom to speak or control. I'd like to take a look at this. They've had it guarded day and night since they moved it here a couple days ago, he said in an excited hurry toward the altar. The altar, now cracked by Beam's summoned force, revealed its inner construction. Scraps of gravestones and shattered memorials bound together with black fungal resin. In the broken center, a single rune pulsed faintly like a dying coal, traced in veined green fungus, a spiral of decay. Behind the altar, smeared in dried blood across the crumbling wall, was a crude mural. A split tower bleeding from its center, surrounded by massive fungal blooms. Beneath it, scrawled in deep gouges, "When the war swallows the strong, the soil will claim the weak." All around the temple, etched into floor stones and pillars, they found more markings. "Let the flesh fail. To the shrine broken, return whole. The bloom is not death, the bloom is release." Over and over, one frantic hand had scratched. Kita. Father Kalen spoke up. Either the bloom reached some point where they decided it was time, or they waited for your warriors to leave for the war. Struck here first in Ironhold because the shrine was close by. They used it to convert. To break good men like Captain Varen and make them a bloom-touched of sorts. I need to report all this to House Redding. Are you all okay for us leaving in the morning? We're okay, I think, Father Kalen replied. And who are you all? After introductions were made and their tales shared, the group found uneasy rest at Ironhold's lone tavern. The barkeep offered rooms without charge and drinks without limit. Blue drank until sleep found him. Mr. E drifted in and out of silence and babbling, staring at his watch. Beam remained outside, as was his way. He knelt in the earth behind the tavern, extending his roots into the cold dirt, as if listening. As always, his rest was still, but not unaware. However, he found an extra restlessness this night. Inside, Markin lay stiff on his straw mattress, eyes open to the rafters above. Sleep hovered, but never landed. Every time his lids drooped, he saw Varen's face again, slack with confusion, blood on his lips, eyes pleading for answers Markin didn't have time to give. Outside, the wind carried the scent of ash and pine. Inside, the silence was thick as wool. None of them had spoken it aloud, but something had shifted. They'd stepped into something new, something darker. Thanks for listening to War Beneath the Roots. If you enjoyed this story so far, consider following or subscribing and leaving a review. Until next time, keep your blade sharp and your fire burning.